Hello, thanks for coming to the last talk with me. It's the party next, so I better not run over. That's the one thing that can't be forgiven. It's just funny, I was having a conversation before the session started about my last name, and I get that question a lot when I'm in this part of the world. As you can tell by my accent, as you could probably tell by my accent, I'm from the US. I actually don't come directly from anywhere in Scandinavia, but I do have ancestors from Sweden. And I should have thought ahead. I have a picture of the guy, the original kind of OG Berglund in my family line who came to the US, like from the early 1900s. Big, proper beard, good shot. Anyway, yes, I do have Scandinavian roots, but I am not myself. I am myself just a guy from the US. This talk is, I want to say, about leadership in general. And it's kind of a tour through some lessons I've learned, some techniques I've applied, things that I think are important. It's, I want to say, not an engineering management talk. That is really a subset and a different thing, and actually GOTO is a place with a lot of content that informs engineering management directly if you're running teams of software developers. What I've got, at least my intent for this talk, can apply to a team of software developers. I run and have for the last several years run developer relations teams. So there are people on a DevRel team who are engineers, right? A developer advocate kind of has to be, in general, a technical person who at least has a background in writing code. But I also have people who look like marketing managers. I have technical writers who work to me. I actually have a couple of filmmakers, video producers on my team. So, like, this is stuff that is going to work on a team of engineers and really more broadly. We'll kind of get to that at the end, how it applies differently to engineering folks. So, that's what to expect. Let's get into it. I think it's a good way to start. By the way, if anybody ever starts a talk with a definition, you want to be suspicious of how the rest of that talk's going to go. That's not a good way to begin. I don't have a definition of leadership, really. And if I did, I wouldn't read it to you. What I do want to think about are some components, just kind of some angles from which we might view the topic to get an idea of what we're talking about before we dive into the, do this, do that, here's how to communicate kind of stuff. Sometimes I like to think of leadership as vision casting. You've got an idea for how things ought to be. You put that idea out in the world, and you call people to follow you towards that. That's very general, okay? That can be, like I said, it can be features. It can be a product. Here is software we are going to write together. This thing over there, let's go build that. It can be a more abstract mission, like the team that works for me right now. Our job is to make Apache Pinot famous, right? Well, does that involve writing code? A little, it involves a lot of things. There's a vision, and you want to put that vision out in front of people and call them to follow it. There is a sense in which I think leadership involves a certain level of discontent. Sometimes I've used the word anxiety to describe this. Now, normally we think of anxiety as a bad thing, and this is a touchy angle here, but just like there's this vision, there's this place I'm calling people to follow me, to go to, a part of me is a little upset that the world's not like that. And I think you find this in people who are leading. There's a little part of them that, like, I want it to be that way. It's not, and I'm kind of not going to be happy till the world is like that. There's a shadow side of that. We'll talk about it. Shepherding. So this is an aspect that usually comes to me first if I'm just going to word associate with leadership. There's this group of people, they are following you, and you're trying to get to some goal, and you get this discontent, you're trying to change the world, but you're actually, in some sense, responsible, at least in the work context, for their health and vitality and safety and all those kinds of things. There's this group of people that you're caring for as you're leading. At least you have, maybe a few years of responsibility for that person's professional growth. It's important. So your capacity as a shepherd. There is just the tactical side, management. Now, I don't know if you've heard this. Maybe there's been a time, maybe you were going for a promotion or something like that. You wanted a formal management position, recognized in the org chart of the company. Maybe you've heard, well, you're a leader here, you're just not a manager. Ooh, that's interesting, right? My antenna always go up a little bit when I hear that. I just feel like somebody has got an agenda, because honestly, I think these two things are separate, but a lot more closely related than we'd like to believe. So if you are functioning as a leader, there's a good chance you're also functioning as a manager. This has to do with communicating, allocating resources, check-ins with people, feedback, taking in the things that happen, so the exigencies of life, all the stuff that happens that you don't expect, and adjusting the activities of this group of people to complete some plan that you've got on schedule. That's the bread and butter of management. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about this. I think it's a key component, and it's usually present. Usually, if you're leading, you're managing. Certainly, if you're managing, I hope that you're leading. Distinguishable, not always separable. Finally, and perhaps at the irreducible minimum, to be a leader is to be followed. Otherwise, as they say, you're just going for a walk. Right? So if you think you're leading and nobody's following you, then you have to kind of look at what's going on. On the other hand, when we get into this strange, the formal hierarchy of the organization, the informal hierarchy, sometimes it's worthwhile to look around. Who are people following? Who are you following? Who's following you? Because ultimately, this is what really answers whether you're leading, whether you're being followed. So those are the components, and I want to kind of use that as just a top-level organization for the rest of the talk. So vision is a really squishy thing, and I've got something that I like to think is a somewhat concrete framework for thinking about it. But again, this is the place you're calling people to go. If it's an engineering team, this can be very simple. You don't have to make this super fancy. You own a product, you own a set of features, you own one or more services. However it is technologically the business is put together, an engineering team probably owns some chunk of that, and you probably know what that is. Okay, so your vision ought to be tightly coupled to that, to delivering those features, moving that product forward, serving the users of that product, something like that. Again, in my world with DevRel teams, I said we want to make Apache Pinot famous. That's pithy and nice and everything like that, but I don't know. So we might need a slightly more concrete framework. What this is not is a mission statement. So I don't know if you've ever gone through that exercise of sitting down together in a room with some other stakeholders and said, well, we're trying to figure out what we're doing, so let's write a mission statement. And if there are 5 people in the room, there are 6 or 7 agendas at least, and the statement ends up being something that is clearly written by a committee. You can clearly see those little pieces of agenda where everybody's arguing for their thing to be represented in the words of the mission statement, and it's a word salad that just doesn't sound like anything a human being would speak in a natural language ever. So mission statements, I don't think they're wrong to do, but I think beginning the task of leading a group when you're trying to get some new effort to kind of coalesce, beginning that with a mission statement is just going to end up with something stupid. I know I'm being recorded. That's strong language. It's just going to be dumb. So let's not do that. Mission statements ought to come after the fact. What comes first? All right, actual concrete framework for thinking about vision. And I think I'm going to use sort of a mind map here. I think this really works well as a mind map. You can do it on a whiteboard. You can do it in a mind mapping tool, whatever you want. You want to start off with thinking about what it is you're trying to accomplish in the world. Again, I'll use myself because my team is not, strictly speaking, an engineering team. It's a DevRel team. And it's a slightly more abstract goal, right? So what's our purpose in the world? StarTree developer relations. We want to make it easy and fun for developers and architects to adopt Apache Pinot and build stuff with it successfully. So that's the thing we're trying to accomplish in the world. Now, there might be other little, you might explore that mind map a little bit and sort of branch out from purpose and explore other parts of that. Okay, I said developers and architects. What does that mean? What about operations? Do I care about people trying to operate Pinot? You know, you might explore that a little bit. Fine, I won't do that here, but start by defining your purpose. Also, you take a certain perspective on the world. This is a component of your team's vision. Some examples of the perspective my team might take. We might believe things like event-driven architecture is important. Microservices are important. These are megatrends that have nothing to do with the company I work for or the technology we're working with. They're just things happening to us, but we recognize them. It's part of our perspective that we think they're important trends that are durable and are going to affect the way people build applications. I think code samples are an important way for people to learn a technology. I think video is a good way for people to develop a mental model of a new idea, et cetera. You know, I don't know. We just have a perspective about things. And this is especially interesting if you, I was just about to say, if you go to a DevRel conference, and I'm not sure I recommend you do that, but I'm actually a person who works in this industry. If you just listen to DevRel people talk, they've got a lot of different ideas about how to get this work done, and that's all going to fold up into perspective. You can imagine, if you run an engineering team, what's going to be there. Okay, what do you think about test-driven development? What do you think about Agile? Well, that's a hot question to ask. You know, I don't know, methodology, all kinds of things, and then there'll be a lot more tactical things in terms of language and platform that are just part of what you believe about the world. Those two things, if you know what you're trying to do in the world, you know the perspective you take on the world, then that will drive priorities that you've got. Okay, so what do we think as a DevRel team? What are our priorities going to be? They're going to be things like, well, I didn't say anything before that would indicate this, but as a part of our perspective, events like this matter. You know, in-person events are going to be a priority for us. Video content's going to be a priority for us. High-quality documentation is going to be a priority for us. You'll be able to see those from what we're trying to get done and what our perspective is. Those will fold into things we prioritize. Personality. This matters, certainly matters a lot for a team like mine where there's lots of outward-facing stuff. You know, what are you like? Are you going to be very precise and focus on details and correctness? Are you going to be fun and open? You know, it applies to an engineering team too, right? You have a certain personality. This can be aspirational. You as a leader can have goals for what you might want this to be. And you might also say, hey, let's just start with describing what the team's personality is. If it's there and if you know the people, you might begin with where you are rather than where you want to be. Now, aspirationally, certainly I've got goals for my team's personality, but there's where we are and where we want to be. All those things, those now feed into the stuff your team actually does. So when I say vision, I'm actually referring to a somewhat specific schema and exercise that you can go do. You can just go build this mind map out and think about these things for your team and what you're trying to get done. Some of these, I hope, are going to relate to goals the business has outside your team. That seems like that would be important, you know, in terms of purpose. Somebody who funds your little part of the organization ought to agree with what that purpose is. But with all those things, you can then, you know, explore what it is you're going to actually do. The cool thing about this schema is you can just draw a line down the, it's my right and it's your right. Why is that so hard? Just down the right there and say those activities, those are things in general that individual contributors are mostly going to focus on. And figuring out purpose, perspective, priorities, all the P words here, in general, should be things that leadership focuses on. Now, at a certain level, as a leader, you want to be careful not to let yourself drift over into focusing too much on the activities and doing those activities. I'll give you an example of maybe how it shouldn't be. Let's see, 3:15. 25 minutes ago, I was in the other room, and I was working on a little piece of Python code that parses a Git log with the numstat option and builds a map of the number of changed lines in files based on a certain date range, and then renders a tree map of that, which I don't know, given my title and size of my team, could be maybe not a thing I should be doing, but it's fun. And so you got to be careful as a leader not to get too far into those activities and be too focused on those, so that you will still have perspective. You can detach a little bit and see these other things. Anyway, that's what I mean by vision. I don't really mean a fuzzy thing. I don't mean sit down and write a mission statement. But if you could imagine going through this exercise with your team and having a fleshed out mind map on a light board or in a shared online doc if you're a remote team, and kind of working through that, putting that in practice, talking about it once a month, iterating on it, a few months of that, I suspect a coherent one-sentence mission statement would emerge from that people could agree on, that wouldn't be that garbage word salad with 6 different agendas, or with n+1 agendas in it, if n is the number of people in the room. So that's what I mean by vision. Worth thinking about. Now, this idea of discontent, this next component. Would anybody here describe yourself as a foodie? Can I see hands? Is that a thing? Okay. I had somebody tell me I was a foodie a few weeks ago, and I didn't like what that felt like. I don't see myself as a foodie at all. I just got married a few months ago, 3 months ago. I would definitely describe my wife as a foodie, and I'm learning a lot from her about just about food. It's great. It's a lot of fun. But foodies at the extreme end are like always a little, it could always be better. They're always a little upset, right? And to me, that makes it seem like trying to not be hungry can become a miserable experience. There's always a shadow side to these things, right? You don't want to be so obsessed with things being better that you just can't freaking eat the food. But there's also a beauty in that, right? If you're thinking about, hey, this could have been elevated in this way. Okay, I'll confess, I'm this way with eggs. Big breakfast guy. And over the last few years, I really think I've perfected my fried egg game. They're beautiful. I've Instagrammed them before. It's been a little, I should show them, right? I don't have any prepared. You're just gonna have to believe me. It's really, if there's any part on the bottom of the egg, like sunny side up, that's caramelized, it's a failure. I know you don't see it, but I don't want that to be caramelized, everything. So, I've got this kind of standard for what that should look like. Likewise, scrambled eggs. So anyway, I don't want to go too far into that. I always want that to get better, and when it's not there, I just have this discontent. So the basic idea here is that the world is not as it ought to be. Something is missing. This does not have to be profound, okay? This doesn't have to be like, there's extreme poverty in the world and you're not going to rest until it's eliminated. That is someone's mission. It doesn't have to be yours. It really can be, this service doesn't have these features, or this service isn't broadly adopted enough, or whatever it is. But there's something that's not right, and you're a little unsettled about it. Now, again, the shadow side, you can be completely undone and come apart as a person and not able to sleep or eat or have friendships. We don't want that, all right? But you do want a little sense of, I don't like this. And yeah, those shadow sides we want to avoid. So anyway, that's the, briefly, this is a component. You should be, as a leader, a little unsettled that things aren't the way they ought to be. This is a big topic for me, and I guess over the past, year, I've really been thinking a lot. I think the journey that I've been on in my own growth as a leader has had to do with this component of leadership. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There's a tension we could probably just put on a one-dimensional axis. And on one end of that axis, we could say something like, shepherding as an extreme, and leaders who focus very much on trying to make sure everybody is cared for, and caretaking is what they do. At the opposite end of that is not abuse, okay, because that's off the table, but at the opposite end of that spectrum in this dimension, as I'm defining it, is, we'll say, performance, calling people to do their best work. And, nowhere along this axis are we able to mistreat people, but some leaders really spike over here, and that's where they focus on, and they're really good at that. Some leaders focus on caretaking, and that's what they default to. Traditionally, I'm that guy, okay? I focus on caretaking, and a lot of my leadership in that capacity is then based on trust. I'm going to give you a safe place to thrive, and I'm going to trust you to do your best work. And that really works when it works. Creates a lot of loyalty, creates great results, everybody has a good time, people grow. And there are times it doesn't work. And so my journey in the past year has been to find a way that I can move on that scale without really giving up my capacity as a shepherd, but figure out ways to call people to do their best work when I've got people who really need to be called and motivated and aren't just going to do that automatically. So this is a big thing to me. I spent a lot of time on this. We got things to talk about. Let's begin with the notion of psychological safety. Did somebody clap? Okay, I appreciate that. I don't know if that was intentional, but there we go. See, I do work primarily for your affirmation. This is important. So, Google ran a research project about 10 years ago. They were trying to figure out what separated their high-performing teams from their low-performing teams. And Google is a company of Silicon Valley, which means kind of the dominant intellectual culture there is that you can know things about the world by measuring things and then making inferences from that data. And that's how you know, and that's how you improve. And so what do? Well, they measured. And how does this work? This is what they're entering into the social sciences by doing that, by the way. I don't know if they really knew that at the time, but just that, we got teams that work, teams that don't. Let's measure things and try to figure out. That is a problem of the social sciences. What do you know about sciences that have the word science in them? They're generally not very good at being sciences. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to put it on their T-shirt. We don't talk about physics science or chemistry science. Nobody says that. You just do them, and they're like, okay, those things work. Social science, we have to kind of improve it a little bit by saying science. So anyway, they had a hard time, and the core problem here, in any kind of study like this, is you're going to go have some metric of performance, and then a bunch of dimensions, you're going to pick some metadata that you're going to evaluate for each team. Do they have? Do they socialize together? Do they have similar educational backgrounds? Is there some kind of age distribution? Are they ethnically diverse? Are they not? What's the gender diversity? They got all this data, which is always all the dimensions that you can think of. Okay, that's, I don't know, maybe obvious. You can only think of the dimensions that you can think of. Those dimensions might be the ones that hold the correlation and even reflect the causation, and they might not. And Google struggled with this for a long time. Okay, so they just looked and sliced and diced in all the ways they could. They found nothing in the data that could separate the high-performing teams from the low-performing teams until they came up with a couple of behavioral properties, ways the teams behaved. What they found was two things. One was airtime management. That is, when the teams meet, everybody in the team felt like they had the ability to be heard in a group discussion. That's harder than it sounds. The other one is social sensitivity, which is that team members could, on average, sense how each other felt through unspoken cues. Now, sometimes, even when designing software together, we get a little mad at each other. We have ideas that we argue, that we advocate for passionately, and I've done it, you've done it, I think we've all done it. You actually get mad about the way code should be written. Strange but true. And certainly in the kinds of decisions that a DevRel team is going to make, the kinds of teams at the executive level that are the kinds of issues at the executive level from a team like mine with respect to other functions. You know, like, what do you think sales wants with folks who register for meetups? Oh, sales would like their names and email addresses. Well, they're not allowed to have them, you know, so you can have impassioned discussions about things like this. And this social sensitivity is just the matter of, you know, can I tell when I say something that makes somebody mad or hurts somebody? Can they tell when they do it to me? They, in the process of discovering these two things, they accidentally rediscovered what this woman, Amy Edmondson, had written about in the early 2000s, about a decade earlier. 1999 was when she first published the term psychological safety. She's kind of the original voice in this. Her definition was of psychological safety, a team climate in which interpersonal trust and mutual respect characterize the team and people are comfortable being themselves. I didn't do, there we are, okay. So that's, it's funny, I have occasionally had, oh, I wonder if, yeah, okay. For effect, I've occasionally used a completely black slide, you know, when I wanted to, like, okay, stop looking at the slides, listen to me. And then I discovered, like, 15% of the people in the room will think something broke, and it really doesn't serve the purpose. Okay, here we are, psychological safety. We're great. It's a safe place. We should be comfortable being ourselves. Now, why does this matter? Okay, so the idea in having a team of people, say, debating an idea is that you want to get the best of every person. You want them to actually bring ideas to the table. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means exposing a little bit of the inside you, the inner you. Nobody, and this is a very, very culturally located issue, right? Different cultures are going to do this in different ways. Nobody really, quote unquote, brings their whole self to work. And frankly, nobody should, right? You know, this is a place where we're trying to get things done. This isn't a family. This isn't where you bathe. It's, you know, it's work. But you're still exposing some of you when you suggest an idea or when you advocate for something that matters to you. And you're not going to do that if you think exposing that part of you exposes you to harm. You just won't. You'll choose to be quiet. Probably, most of us will choose to be quiet rather than risk getting hurt. That's how it goes. If we talk at the party, I'd be interested in knowing like what the stereotypes are of Americans there. Like, what are we, like, always talking about our therapists? I don't know, you can tell me later. But I know this varies by geography quite a bit. But you got to think about what your brain is like under threat. Now, this can be kind of a crass physical threat, like you think somebody's going to stick you with a spear, hit you with a club, or really it can be an emotional threat. The physiology and the stuff your brain does, very similar in both cases. So when you're under threat, you go to very short-term thinking. You don't think about the long-term anymore. You just think about very, very near time horizons. You are not creative under threat. Right? You're not thinking of new things when you think there's danger. We go to very black and white thinking. So you don't see a lot of nuance, any kind of shades. It's this or that. Very binary. And hey, sometimes that is appropriate. Sometimes it's not. And just seeing black or white is going to cause us to miss ideas that would be a good way forward in a team debate. Also, we revert to pattern. We don't come up with new ideas when we're under threat. And this is why if you look at the way militaries train, there's lots and lots of drilling and repetition. It's not because they only recruit very stupid people who need to be drilled that much. It's because in the kind of conditions where they actually practice their vocation, in real scenarios, they are definitionally under threat. And so the stuff that they're going to do is stuff that's been drilled into them. And you got to look for that. You're going to revert to pattern or training when you're under threat. You don't want these things. These are not going to help us make good decisions together as teams. So how do you help a team feel safer? What can you actually do about this? Well, here's one thing you can't do. You can't say, good news, here we believe in psychological safety. This is a safe team. So if anybody says that, then that's a good sign that that's really not true. Okay, or at least maybe they have good intentions and they're talking about something they would like to be true, they aspire to be true, but it can't be declared. It's like corporate culture. I don't know if you folks do that over here, but over in the US, it'd be typical for, in an all-hands meeting, every once in a while, a CEO to have, some bullet points about corporate culture. Here are our values, which is cool. Again, it's okay to state those things and put them into words, but it doesn't matter what's on that slide. What matters is what people experience. The culture of an organization is a thing that's experienced, and that can begin with written declarations of what we aspire for that experience to be, but they're never the same thing. Likewise, we don't say it's a safe team. Safety is experienced over time. If you're taking on a team that has had an unsafe leader in the past, well, then their experience on that team is not being safe. And it's going to take a while for them to experience new things to believe that it is. You can't say it. Doesn't matter what you say. Matters what you do. So you can manage airtime. And this has to do really with two things. Number one, making space for quiet people. That sounds obvious, but you just have to do it. And the way I approach this is I will just do this directly in a team discussion. I'll say, so-and-so, we haven't heard from you. What do you think? And actually be open to that. So that prompt is part of that. What comes next is the other part. So they can't get belittled, made fun of, can't have like damaging things happen as a result of that, of them opening up. Now you don't have to get their way. We're adults. We don't always get our way, but it has to be a positive or at least neutral experience for them to speak after you prompt them to speak. So that's really important. So for you as a leader, assuming you're the leader, that's hopefully easy to do. You just let that happen. Others in the team, this is the second part. So there are people who won't talk unless you pull it out of them, and there are people who won't stop. And if this is you, well, stop. That's easy. Just control yourself. And if you can't, then there's a bigger problem. What I've done with very talkative people, I've had folks on my teams before who have thought, I've got a lot of ideas and I should be sharing them. And, this is leadership for me to be saying all the good stuff that I've got in mind, and inadvertently just taking the mic and not really letting go of it enough. They're always the one talking. My approach, and your mileage may vary, my approach with quiet people is, in the meeting, just ask them to talk. My approach with talkative people is not to tell them to shut up in the meeting. I can imagine team cultures and things where that can be done, and it's clear that it's respectful and loving and all that. I'm not averse to, I'm a guy. I have friends. There's a certain way we typically interact. That can be okay. But what I've done here is take this out of band, not address it in the meeting, address it one-on-one, and you want to help that person develop tools to know when they are taking too much airtime and control themselves. So that's growth for that person. And it keeps you from the, one way or another, it's going to sound like shut up. You can have very gentle ways of doing that, but really you want to give that person tools for managing themselves. And if you're the leader, you speak last. If you're, hiring, okay, we're going through the loop. What's everybody think of this person? You speak last. If it's your referral, well, that's pretty obvious if it's your referral, right? Everybody knows you're going to like the person. And I fall down on this one on the regular. If it's somebody I'm excited about, everybody's going to know it's somebody I'm excited about, right? And I've even had folks in the loop ask me, is this a Tim hire? Are we just doing this? Or do you really want information? And that's very convicting. And actually one time I said, I'm going to make this happen. And I would appreciate you being a part of the interview process. It was a good question, and I was honest about it. I'm like, I'm definitely doing this, but we need a big group of people talking to this person, and it's good for you to get to know them because you're probably going to be working together. And that wasn't like that person's supervisor or anything like that. It was a little more indirect. But yeah, you generally want to speak last because if you're in charge, you will probably underestimate the strength of your words. So you go last. And when people are using their airtime, it's important that you let them criticize your ideas. Now, if you have a team of more than 2 people, there's probably going to be somebody with some willingness to do this. I've been blessed with people very willing to do this in my time. And when you have that person, and there's 2 ways it can be. We're assuming the person of goodwill who shares your vision and is following you and thinks you're wrong sometimes. So it's important that the team have the experience of that person being able to criticize what you say and what you want and have that be an open discussion and not a thing that results in some kind of negative impact on them. So let them criticize you. Now, when it is somebody who really just doesn't like you, you'll know the difference, probably, I hope, between honest discussion and undermining and that kind of thing. I've also had that experience, and that's usually a person that you have to manage out of the organization because that's pretty toxic. But that's not because you can't be criticized. You can be wrong. You can be told no. You can lose all the time. There's even, I had to do this a few weeks ago. It was terrible. There's kind of a cost to winning or to saying, no, we're going to do it my way. That better be really rare. I had that a few weeks ago. It was this very specific tactical thing about the way we were describing an event. And my events manager, who is a rock star, an experienced person, wanted this thing, and I wanted this other thing. And it mattered to me a lot, and it mattered to her a lot, and we talked through it, and neither one of us was going to move, and it was my call, and I actually said, we're going to do it my way. You got to be really careful when you do that. That costs you leadership capital to do. I mean, you're the boss, you can do it, but you would rather everybody else come to the conclusion that you would like them to come to on their own and tell you why that's true than you telling them, here's what's true, here's what's right, believe it. You can do it, but you're spending chips. So, social sensitivity, this is a tough one. If you're a remote team, a lot of folks are returning to office these days, but I think gallery mode on Zoom calls is a good idea. Camera on as a suggested default. I would never say camera on as a requirement. I think that impacts different groups of people in an organization differently, and especially to my other guys in the room, you may not fully appreciate that, but camera on, mandatory camera on, may not have an equal impact in every part of the team, so you might want to be aware of that. But yeah, if you're remote, cameras are good. Watch for facial expressions. If you're in person, it's a lot easier. You want to look for people who are maybe self-censoring or looking like they're going to talk and then don't. And so, important point here, either this is natural and you don't think about it, or when I say, you know, watch facial expressions, you're like, yeah, everybody's told me that my whole life. I have no idea what you're talking about. I've had to learn that the hard way, right? That, you know, the room divides into those two groups. And so if that is hard for you, you know the things that you've done to try to be good at that, and it is always going to be a little bit more difficult, but there are some kind of objective tools that you can learn and patterns you can find and things like that. But do the best that you can in reading this. And if you're just bad at faces, you can just ask. Say, hey, is that okay? Were you okay with me saying that? Just be clear so that we know what the impact of our words are on each other. And that's psychological safety. All right. It's funny, I swapped this talk in at the last minute. It's normally like a 90-minute talk. I fear I may not have edited everything down quite right. So let's charge forward a little bit by talking about communication. Again, a super concrete, tactical tool that I think I've used before. I think it's great for the workplace. The DISC model. Some people call it a personality test. I don't know how you feel about personality tests. There's Myers-Briggs, which tends to be used in the workplace a lot. There's Enneagram, which is usually less workplace and more like relationship-y. And they're all, when you look at the scientific basis of them, again, this is the social sciences, so science, asterisk. They're generally not that great, right? They're tools that can be useful for self-understanding. DISC is kind of similar, but it's not really trying to be a personality model. It's more of like a communication model, all right? It's about how we talk to each other. And the idea is you can use this tool to figure out how your team likes to be communicated to, what their default is. And you, the good news is, as a leader, you get to adapt to that. I had a boss once who began his tenure by publishing several page-long document about how to interact with him. And I mean, that probably comes from a good place, right? That's not particularly abusive or anything like that. But what I want to suggest to you is it's much less your problem to get people to communicate with you the way you like, and much more your problem for you to learn how your people want to and default to communicating, and you adapt to them. You serve them. You are in charge. You get to do that rather than making them serve you. Presumably, as the leader, you have the strength to do that serving and that learning, and so you get to do it. The basic model, there are these 4 categories. They're called dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. People have done this with animals. I don't work with kindergartners a lot, so I don't do the animal version. I feel like these words are fine, golden retriever and I forget what the other ones are. Lion. I tend to substitute other names for those. So yeah, these are the basic 4 models. There are kind of superpowers and corresponding weaknesses to each one. There is no right one. Like dominance isn't the right one to be a leader. That's just not how it works. But broadly, we could divide the world up like this. You could say the D and the I are people who believe that they are more powerful than their environment. They can influence their environment. C and S believe they're less powerful than their environment. D and C believe the environment is unfavorable. The world kind of sucks in some way. I and S think the environment is favorable. The world is great. We just need to make it better. Or you could say outgoing and reserved, task-oriented, and people-oriented. So this world divides up into these are the 4 kinds of people that look like this. And you could take an assessment. They're usually not very expensive. You can get versions online that get scored. And you end up with like a high one and a low one. For example, I'm a high I, high D. So mostly I and then less D. A high D person is like a person who wants to tell you to make them a sandwich, right? As a high I, high D, I want you to want to make me a sandwich. So I'm going to try to get you really excited. I mean, where there's going to be sandwiches made, make no mistake. But I would like you to be excited about that and really want to do it. And get fired up about how great that sandwich is going to be. Yes, I want to do that. And so very, very useful set of tools worth exploring, worth looking at more. The idea being that everybody's got their default, and you're going to give feedback to people differently depending on where they land here. You might message, email people differently. Like emailing me is just a bad idea. I'm probably not going to read it. Might be better slacking me. But emailing a high D, you can just have like 2 sentences of what you need. Blah, blah, just do it. Why are you screwing around with me, right? A high C person is going to need a lot of detail. A high S person, if you just give them 2 sentences of what you need, they're going to think, oh, why is my boss mad at me? You know, you'd want to ask, how you doing? How's the weekend? How's this thing going? Hey, by the way, I could use this. You know, there are all kinds of tools when you dig into the details of this assessment that help you with communication. Means of offering feedback. If you don't give direct feedback to a high D, they're not going to hear it, and they're probably going to think you're lame. If you give direct feedback to a high S, they'll cry, right? If you give feedback to a C, it better have a lot of facts and a lot of information in it. If you give feedback to an I, you know, you better tell them that, you know, their impact on things is still really positive and everybody likes them. But also don't do this, you know. There you go. Good stuff, worth knowing about. I will just go quickly. We'll talk about management a little bit. You know, I said if you're leading, you're probably managing, you know, responsible for the careers of people, responsible for helping them know what it is they're supposed to be doing, whether they're doing it well. You know, that work is not family. I really don't like companies that describe themselves as families. It's never true, but it is a relationship with people. It is a thing that people do collectively, and it's probably in a pie chart of what we do during the day, during the week, the biggest chunk. It's the plurality activity of our lives. So the way you treat people really matters. I'm just going to make a recommendation in the interest of time. These folks, Manager Tools, there's a podcast that's been around forever. They've got training available. Been to one of their trainings years ago. They couldn't fix everything, but they did the best they could. This link brings you to kind of a best of collection of the podcast that are some very specific tactical tools for the 4-part kind of cocktail they've got, which is one-on-ones, feedback, coaching, and delegation. They talk about how to do all those things. All their advice may not be for you. You need to take it, internalize it, adapt it, throw out what you don't like, use what you do like. Especially the stuff on one-on-ones, I think, is gold. The stuff on feedback is a little prescriptive, but it's good to know. Delegation, yeah, I'm bad at that, so sore spot for me. Forget about delegation. Coaching, their coaching stuff is great. So, yeah, very, very important stuff, and I would say you should check that out. Now, yeah, ideally, people under your leadership, under your management are growing. You want to see that happen. If you've got somebody who's not, then maybe it's because they don't want to. Maybe they're doing something that they like and they kind of want to stay there. I would honor that. If it's a person who does want to grow and they're not, that's a problem. You won't retain them, and it's on you to help them get into a position where they will grow. Sometimes you can't. I've lost folks because it just wasn't going to happen anymore. There wasn't anything for them to do in the organization. That's okay. You want to find strengths that they can grow in. You don't want to take their weaknesses and make them into strengths. You want to mitigate their weaknesses, work around those things, and the things that they're strong in, you want to push them in. And that gets us to an abrupt end. We can talk more about this later if you'd like. I had a picture of the 501st, but didn't manage the time to be able to get to this. Briefly, you know, this is about tech leadership. Is it different than any other kind of leadership? In some ways, no. In many ways, people who get into tech are people who are more interested in things than people. And so you moving into a leadership position Your primary responsibility has become people and not things. And so you need to be ready for that. You need to think about what it is you want, what it is you're trying to do. Why are you in this leadership position? Did they make you? Do you want it? Are you ready to make that pivot from things to people? Can you be intentional about that? I think you have to. I would encourage you to think through that. So with that, let us get out of here, move to the party. Thank you so much.